Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex topics, really get into the core ideas for you. And today, we're tackling something incredibly profound and honestly often misunderstood: trauma. We're looking at how truly horrific experiences, they don't just shatter lives, they fundamentally reorganize the way our minds and brains handle perception. It affects not just what we think, but really our ability to think. So our mission in this deep dive: explore the breakthroughs in understanding trauma, its impact on body and mind, and maybe the exciting new ways people can heal, ways to really thrive, moving beyond just getting by.
Absolutely. And for this, we're drawing quite heavily on insights from a real leader in the field, Dr. Bessel Kolk. His work is just, well, it's known for being clear, fascinating, and filled with these really powerful case histories. So you're going to hear how psychological trauma can essentially fragment the mind. It can break vital connections inside the brain and, crucially, disconnect the mind from the body.
That's a really potent framework, disconnecting mind and body. And yeah, throughout this, we'll share some pretty riveting stories. Patients, their struggles. Yeah, all interpreted through, history, research, neuroscience. So let's start where a lot of this understanding began for the experts: on the ground, with people who'd lived through, well, unimaginable things. Okay, picture this. 1978, a psychiatrist, Boston VA clinic, he meets this Vietnam veteran, Tom, disheveled, agitated, plagued by nightmares. But when they offer him medication, Tom refuses. Says he needs to be a living memorial to his friends who died. What does that tell us? That phrase, a living memorial, what was going on there?
That's such a crucial starting point, isn't it?
Yeah.
This deep loyalty Tom felt. And it turns out he'd kind of inherited it from his father's experience in the Battle of the Bulge. It really shone a light on a profound truth. Trauma was just so much more complex than, bad memories or some chemical imbalance. It transformed everything for these guys, left them in these states of just extreme rage. You could literally see it, apparently, in the pockmarked walls of the clinic. It was visceral, embodied, not just in the head.
Wow. And it sounds like back then, the official literature, war neurosis, shell shock, it just wasn't there. So traditional psychiatry was kind of unprepared for this.
Completely unprepared. Yeah, there was a striking lack of resources on it. So Dr. Van Kolk, the expert we're drawing from, he basically had to learn directly from his patients. They became his textbook. And he was guided by his own teacher, Elvin Semrad, who had this famous saying: "The greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves."
Okay, the lies we tell ourselves. How did that idea, that philosophy about confronting internal, lies, how did that help figure out how trauma changes a person's core sense of self?
Semrad's insight was just foundational. It shifted the focus away from just listing symptoms and towards the patient's inner world. What were they avoiding? What couldn't they put into words? And this led to a pretty stark realization. Trauma fundamentally changes your sense of self. It often traps you in the past. And the early research on this, well, it was eye-opening. Think of the Rorschach test, the ink blots. They used it with veterans. And on one specific card, a color one, the second card, 16 out of 21 veterans reacted like they were right back in the war. They weren't seeing like dancing monks, the common response. No, they saw things like the bowels of my friend Jim or the neck of my friend Danny, just grotesque, traumatic scenes.
That is incredibly vivid and disturbing. And you mentioned some just went blank, lost the ability to imagine.
Yeah, 5 of them.
Yeah.
The capacity for imagination, gone.
So what does that tell us about how trauma warps perception, this idea of superimposing the past? Is it like they literally see differently? Or is it more cognitive, like their mental flexibility is just shots stuck on replay?
It's really both, actually. Their nervous systems get so primed for danger that they do, in a way, literally see threats and past trauma and things that are totally benign now. Their brains are stuck looping that old reel. And that's why imagination, the ability to think of alternatives, different possibilities, just shuts down. It goes blank. And this deep insight, it was a major factor leading to the official diagnosis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in 1980.
Right, PTSD, which was huge, a crucial step.
Yeah.
But initially, it sounds like it was very focused, mainly on combat veterans, single big T traumas.
Exactly. That was the initial frame: combat, single incidents. But as we understand much better now, the reality is just.
Yeah.
It's far broader, more pervasive. For so many people, like you said earlier, the war begins at home.
Yeah, the statistics are shocking when you put them side by side. Maybe a quarter of soldiers in war zones develop serious issues. Okay. But 12 million women in the U.S. have been victims of rape, over half before they were 15.
And add to that, about 3 million children reported each year in the U.S. as victims of abuse and neglect. So you do the math. For every one soldier in a war zone, There were roughly 10 children endangered in their own homes.
That's staggering. And deeply tragic, because the source of the terror is meant to be the source of safety. They're caretakers.
Precisely. It turns safety into danger. And trauma, just by its nature, it pushes us right to the edge of what we can comprehend. It often cuts us off from language itself. It changes not just how we think, but our variability, our capacity to think clearly.
And that connects back to the talking cure idea, right? Finding words is important, sure, but it often isn't enough on its own. Not enough to change those automatic physical hormonal responses. The body keeps the score.
That's the phrase, yes.
Yeah.
The body keeps the score. It holds on to it.
So can we unpack that? What exactly is happening in the brain, in the body? How does it encode terror and helplessness so deeply?
Absolutely. Let's get into neuroscience a bit. Start with the brain's absolute #1 job, survival. You've got the older parts, the reptilian brain, the limbic system.
Yeah.
Together, we often call that the emotional brain.
Okay.
Think of it like your internal smoke detector, always scanning for threats. And when it senses danger, real or perceived, it floods the system with stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline.
Right, the fight or flight juice.
Exactly. But in PTSD, that system basically goes into overdrive. It gets stuck on.
Yeah.
Which leads to that constant feeling of agitation, being hyper-aroused, jumpy.
So how does a healthy brain balance that? The smoke detector versus, say, conscious control? And how does trauma mess that balance up?
Well, normally there's this critical balance, this communication, between the amygdala, that's the smoke detector, and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is more like the watchtower. It gives perspective, conscious control, mindfulness. It can say, okay, smoke detector, false alarm. Got it. Trauma disrupts that connection severely. So the watchtower can't calm the smoke detector down, which leaves the person driven by these impulsive, reactive fight-or-flight responses. There's a great analogy. It's like a rider trying to manage a panicked, unruly horse. The conscious mind, rider, struggles to control the overwhelmed emotional brain, horse.
That's a powerful image. Rider and unruly horse. And you see this vividly in that story of Stan and Ute Lawrence, right? The horrific car pileup.
Oh, absolutely. A terrible 87 car pileup. Months later, Stan's in a brain scanner, just being asked to recall the accident. And physically, he starts sweating, his heart races, his body is reliving it right there in the scanner.
So that's dissociation in action, where the experience gets fragmented.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's the essence of it. The overwhelming experience isn't processed like a normal memory, a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It gets shattered into fragments, sensations, images, sounds, smells, raw data. And these fragments get triggered later, making the person feel like they're literally reliving the event. Stan's body was still trying to escape the crash. His system was stuck in defense. It couldn't learn the danger was over.
Wow. And that leads to another really puzzling thing you mentioned, the compulsion to repeat.
Ah, yes. That one is deeply perplexing.
It seems so counterintuitive. Traumatized people seeking out situations that feel familiar, even if they're dangerous. Like the example of Julia, raped at 16, then later finding herself in violent relationships. Why would that happen?
It's incredibly complex and honestly not fully understood, but there are theories. One idea involves a kind of perverse relief or regulation attempt. If your body is constantly jacked up in the state of high alert, maybe recreating that familiar intensity feels, in a twisted way, predictable, or even momentarily numbing. There's this fascinating experiment.
Yeah.
Combat veterans watching a combat movie could tolerate physical pain, like holding their hand in ice water 30% longer. That pain reduction was equivalent to about 8 milligrams of morphine.
Whoa. So the stress hormones during the re-exposure actually had an analgesic effect.
It suggests something like that, yeah, a very complex interplay. Maybe the body seeks that internal opioid release associated with extreme stress, even if it's destructive. It's a grim kind of familiarity.
That is mind-bending. Okay, so moving on slightly, there was another huge piece of the puzzle, the ACE study. Adverse childhood experiences.
Oh, the ACE study. Yes, absolutely pivotal. And it was almost accidental the way they connected the dots. They were initially studying obesity, but they found these incredibly strong links between adverse experiences in childhood and, well, all sorts of problems later in life. And crucially, these adverse experiences were deeply interrelated. It wasn't just one thing.
What kind of correlations did they find? What sort of problems are we talking about?
The correlations were just dramatic, off the charts. High ACE scores, meaning more adverse childhood experiences, strongly correlated with things like learning problems, trouble holding down a job, financial stress, and chronic depression. For women with an ACE score of 4 or more, the prevalence of chronic depression was something like 66%.
66%, wow.
And it got worse. A 5,000% increased likelihood of suicide attempts compared to people with zero ACEs. Exponentially higher rates of alcoholism, IV drug use,
Those that the list goes on.
just devastating long-term impacts.
Absolutely. But maybe one of the most profound insights from ACE was realizing that what looks like a problem, say obesity or addiction or anger, might actually be a solution. An adaptation the person developed, often unconsciously, to survive the trauma. Maybe obesity felt like creating a protective barrier, for example.
Problem is solution. That completely reframes things, doesn't it?
It really does. It highlights how just treating the problem without understanding its roots, its adaptive function, can lead to failed treatments or even create new problems. That seems like such a critical shift for anyone working with people, really. And does this tie into the proposed diagnosis of developmental trauma disorder, DTD? The idea that early trauma doesn't just cause PTSD symptoms, it actually rewires the developing brain.
Exactly. DTD recognizes that ongoing maltreatment in childhood isn't just a series of incidents. It fundamentally shapes the structure and function of the developing brain and nervous system. And we see this through epigenetics now.
Right, epigenetics, that's where experience can actually change how our genes are expressed.
Precisely. It's not changing the genes themselves, but changing whether they get turned on or off. Like, a classic example, mother rats licking their pups. That simple nurturing act permanently changes the pup's stress response systems through epigenetic markers. And in humans, childhood abuse has been shown to leave distinct modifications on at least 73 different genes.
So our social world, our relationships, literally get under our skin and affect our biology.
Directly. And this is critical because, get this, something like 82% of kids seen in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, they don't actually meet the criteria for PTSD.
82%. So what do they show?
They show pervasive problems with emotional regulation, attention, impulse control, relationships, self-harm. It's a much more diffuse, whole-system dysregulation, reflecting how developmental trauma reshapes the entire person, not just their memory of specific events.
Okay, so if the traditional approach is talking cures, medications often fall short, especially, as you mentioned, for veterans. The veteran who said meds left him in a fog and talking just triggered flashbacks. What are the paths to recovery then? What helps integrate these fragmented experiences and rebuild that sense of self?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? And thankfully, there are increasingly effective approaches, often blending new science with sometimes ancient wisdom. Let's start with one you might have heard of, EMDR. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
EMDR, right. I've heard it can be quite rapid.
It can be remarkably rapid for some people. There's a powerful story about David, a contractor who lost an eye in an assault at 23. He was filled with rage for years. Through EMDR, he processed that rage, even came to forgive his assailant, found inner peace, started enjoying simple things like gardening again. What EMDR seems to do is, well, it loosens something in the mind-brain connection related to the trauma. It allows access to the memories, but in a way that feels less overwhelming, allowing them to be processed, often without needing extensive talking or even a deep therapeutic relationship initially.
That's fascinating. And you mentioned a study comparing it to Prozac.
Yes, our own study, actually with civilians, it showed EMDR was significantly more effective than Prozac in reducing both PTSD symptoms and depression scores.
Wow, okay, so that's one powerful tool. Now, if the body keeps the score, it makes logical sense that healing needs to involve the body, right? Regaining a sense of control over internal sensations. Is that where body-based therapies fit?
Exactly right. That's the core idea. Healing absolutely demands regaining a sense of safety and mastery within your own skin. Simply learning to notice what you feel, non-judgmentally, is a huge step towards emotional regulation. So you see therapies like yoga being incredibly helpful. One study showed just 10 weeks significantly reduced PTSD symptoms in women who hadn't responded to other treatments.
10 weeks of yoga, that's accessible.
Very. And other practices too, Feldenkrais, Tai Chi, Qigong, certain martial arts, they all emphasize mindful movement, breathing, being present in your body. It's about cultivating what scientists call interoception.
Interoception, meaning?
Basically, the ability to sense your internal state, to feel your heartbeat, your breath, muscle tension, gut feelings. In trauma survivors, this ability is often severely dampened. Shutting off overwhelming or terrifying bodily sensations becomes a survival strategy. But it's a tragic adaptation because you also shut off feelings of aliveness, connection, joy.
Right, you lose touch with yourself, so you need to gently reconnect. Okay, what about internal family systems, IFS? You mentioned viewing the mind as an internal family with different parts. How does that work?
IFS is a really compassionate and empowering model. It suggests our psyche is made up of various parts. You have managers, the parts that try to keep things under control, often critical or perfectionistic. Then firefighters, the reactive parts that jump in when emotional pain gets too intense. Think addictions, self-harm, rage, outbursts, anything to douse the flames quickly. And then the exiles, these are the young, vulnerable parts holding the raw pain, fear, and shame from past traumas, especially childhood abuse.
Okay, managers, firefighters, exiles. So the goal isn't to get rid of these parts.
Not at all. The goal is to understand them, appreciate their protective intentions, even if their methods are destructive, and unburden the exiles. The key is learning to access what IFS calls the self, your core of wisdom, calm, confidence, compassion, curiosity, the undamaged essence of who you are. When you can connect with self, you can relate to your parts with understanding, rather than being overwhelmed or controlled by them. Think of Joan, the woman who could flip from kick-ass professional to whimpering child instantly. IFS helped her understand the parts driving her bulimia and affairs, see their protective roles rooted in past hurt, and begin to heal them from a place of self-compassion.
Befriending your parts instead of fighting them. That sounds revolutionary, actually.
It really can be. And there was a study using IFS with rheumatoid arthritis patients. It showed significant improvements not just in depression, but in their perception of physical pain and their levels of self-compassion. It shows how relating differently to your internal states can change your physical experience.
Wow. Okay, another approach you touched on was psychomotor therapy, PBSP. Using structures or tableaus. That sounds quite different. What does that look like?
It's very experiential, very body-based. PBSP uses the therapy group in a unique way. It creates these structures, which are like living sculptures or scenes set up in the room. Group members take on roles, maybe the client's actual parents, but also, crucially, ideal parents. This allows the client, the protagonist, to symbolically re-experience and rewrite crucial past scenes in a three-dimensional felt way. Remember Maria, the aggressive teen from foster care, terrified of her father.
Yes.
In a PBSP structure, she could have group members embody her fear, her father, and importantly, an ideal mother figure. And she could experience, viscerally, this ideal mother standing up to the father figure, protecting her. It uses the power of embodied imagination to literally install new imprints of safety, support, and comfort deep in the nervous system. It could be incredibly powerful for developmental trauma.
That sounds intense, but potentially transformative, allowing the body to experience what was missing.
Okay, and then there's neurofeedback, mapping brainwaves. How does that help with trauma?
Neurofeedback is fascinating. It works directly with the brain's electrical activity, its rhythms. Basically, you get real-time feedback, visual or auditory, about your own brainwave patterns. And through operant conditioning, you learn to shift those patterns towards healthier, more regulated states, calmer, more focused states. Lisa's story is just remarkable here.
The woman who went from a homeless shelter to nursing school?
That's her. Severely dissociative, couldn't recognize herself in a mirror, described this constant hum of low-level conversations inside her head, just totally fragmented. Through neurofeedback, she literally trained her brain to calm down, to reduce the dissociative activity. The hum stopped. She could integrate those parts. She regained her ability to connect, to feel whole, to live her life. It fundamentally rewired her brain circuits. As one expert put it, quite bluntly, if any medication had demonstrated such a wide spectrum of efficacy, it would be universally accepted and widely used. That's a powerful statement about neurofeedback's potential. Okay, finally, let's talk about communal rhythms in theater. How do shared experiences, creativity, play into healing?
These are vital, especially because trauma is so isolating. It cuts people off. Communal activities, rhythm, shared expression, they rebuild connection. Think about Archbishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He used collective singing, dancing.
Really? During the commission?
Yes, to help witnesses regulate, to help them pendulate, gently move between the horror of their testimony and the safety of the present moment, the shared rhythm of the group. It helped prevent re-traumatization. Or look at Brian Dory's Theater of War. They perform ancient Greek tragedies like Ajax or Philoctetes for military audiences.
Greek tragedies for Marines. How does that work?
Because those ancient plays grapple with the timeless burdens of war, loss, betrayal, moral injury. Things soldiers still face today. Seeing it enacted, discussing it together, breaks the isolation. It gives voice to the unspeakable. There's the story of Larry, a Vietnam vet. He played Brutus in Julius Caesar as part of a therapeutic theater project. Embodying Brutus's conflicts helped him confront his own past, his guilt, his trauma. It led to this profound physical and emotional release. He even described experiencing his first orgasm in the presence of another person afterward, as decades of stored tension finally let go.
Wow, that's incredibly intimate and powerful.
It highlights how being truly in your body, finding your voice, and connecting with others in a shared experience is fundamental to healing. Theater, rhythm, play, they create a space to collectively confront hard truths, regain a sense of agency, and feel belonging again.
So, wrapping this all up, what are the big takeaways for us? It feels like we're really on the cusp of becoming a more trauma-conscious society, understanding that the body truly does keep the score.
I think so, or at least the knowledge is there. The challenge is applying it.
Yeah.
Yes, the body encodes terror, helplessness, rage, and these deep, visceral sensations, which means real healing has to go beyond just talking about it. It has to help people calm those fight or flight responses physically, help them reorganize how they perceive danger, and, crucially, repair their relationship with themselves and with others. It's holistic.
And the critical lesson seems to be effective help isn't just meds or talk therapy alone. It's much more about self-regulation.
Exactly. Helping people learn to manage their internal states, to tolerate their sensations without being overwhelmed, and using imagination, creativity, body awareness to rewrite those internal maps of the world that got skewed by trauma. Think about kids in schools. Instead of just punishing bad behavior, which is so often a symptom of traumatic stress, a firefighter part trying to cope. What if we prioritize things that build regulation and connection? Things like chorus, PE, dance, drama, even just unstructured recess and play. Activities involving movement, rhythm, joyful engagement with others. These cultivate cooperation, self-regulation, focus, perseverance. They aren't luxuries. For kids dealing with adversity, they are essential interventions.
Viewing those activities as core parts of mental health and resilience, not just extras.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the incredible resilience we see, people recovering even after unimaginable suffering. It's a testament to our fundamental capacity to heal each other, whether it's through the direct body work or rewriting internal narratives with IFS or PBSP, or rewiring brain circuits with neurofeedback, or the shared power of theater and rhythm. The common thread is integration, bringing fragmented parts back together, regaining agency, reestablishing belonging.
It's about becoming whole again. So that leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty important question to think about, doesn't it?
I think it does. Consider this. If our society really embraced this understanding, that problems are often solutions for trauma survivors, and if we genuinely invested in these holistic, body-aware, community-based ways of healing, right, from early life, how might that fundamentally change our collective future? What burdens, personal and societal, could we finally start to put down?